It's dark and dreary, it's stormy, it's harsh environments, it's cold, it's what they call them, like, Byronic figures, these, like, grim dudes showing up on this ferry. You've got grim business to attend to, and they're in a place that's gone mad, and, like, the way a lot of the buildings are described, it's like they're holding on for dear life as the elements try and, like, tear them into the sea. Welcome, friends, to episode 328 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And this week we discuss Dennis Lehane's 2003 novel, Shutter Island. So we are going to get into our Shutter Island episode as per usual here in a moment. But I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about the American election. So if you do not want to hear that, we will have that in the show notes, like a time code, and you can skip ahead to the part where we get into the book. But just for a moment, I want to talk about it. We just covered They Live. We talked about it at the end, that, like, this was a project that seemed really timely, and we were getting into some political topics last week, and then the election happened. And it did not go how I think either of us were hoping.
Nope.
I just wanted to, like, react to that and talk a little bit about it. I like to hear this stuff from the creators that I follow. So I think this is a good time to kind of get some stuff off our chests.
Yeah. It sucks. Let's start by saying that this is a shitty scenario. Not what I was expecting. I think, like, I don't know, many in this party feel like we were kind of gaslit by a lot of different media outlets or whatever. Like, it just seemed like it was going to go a certain way, and then it was just completely wrong. And maybe that's an echo chamber kind of thing. I don't know what happened there, but for me, I'm just like, I can definitely say I'm still reeling. Sense of depression, sense of, like, it hurts for so many people, and it's going to affect people. It just feels so heavy, and, like, this isn't where we could be in terms of, like, caring for our fellow humans, and I don't know, that it's kind of inconceivable to me that this many people voted for this scenario, and then the number of people who didn't show up. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I'm just really bummed.
Definitely had been reeling the last few days. And, I've heard a lot of people talk about it as, like, we're kind of going through stages of grief right now for a future that we thought was coming, that is, clearly not, at least immediately, going to be happening. And they talk about moving through stages of grief. And at some point, I kind of shifted into anger after the sadness. And that kind of energized me a little bit. And I think that's why I wanted to come on here and talk. Because at first I was like, I don't know how we're going to do an episode, because I was just feeling so in the dumps about it. But this is where I'm at today. I've been thinking about it a lot. And, like, we started our podcast in 2017 during the first Trump administration. And we talked about it beforehand, like, how, what's the goal of the podcast? How are we going to approach talking about books and movies? And we recognized we were two white guys entering a review space. And, like, that's in and of itself kind of a cliche, right? Two white straight guys having a podcast about art. And it's like, okay, good, another one. But we said, if we're going to do this, especially during a Trump administration, we're going to not shy away from our progressive politics, from our belief that art is political. And if we're going to talk about art in an honest way and talk about, like, the themes and the purpose behind it and the potential for harm that art can have as well, I think to do that honestly, you have to engage with it politically. And for the people who want you to not do that, they are themselves engaging with it in a different political way, and that is a way that is, they do not want to be challenged. They do not want to be made uncomfortable by art, and that is in and of itself a conservative political standpoint, in my opinion. So that's how we set out to do the podcast, and I think that's what we've done over the years. Is something that I'm proud of. And it's frustrating, to feel like it doesn't matter. Like the guy wins the plurality of the vote with his like hateful messages and his narcissism, and his administration seems to me that it's going to be an assault on all the people I care about. But I also recognize that I and you, James, are we're not the ones who are going to suffer the most. We may suffer by association. We may suffer if we choose to oppose it, right? Because we'll be labeled enemies, right? He said as much, right? Basically called us the enemy within. But our identities, our immutable identities, are not the ones that are being directly, under attack. Like trans people, like women, people of color. It's maddening to me to see it playing out this way, but it, to me, reinforces my commitment to try and be a white guy in a creative space, in a review space, who is willing to engage with it from a position of privilege, but to try and engage with topics that are difficult, that might, question, my position in society, that might make me uncomfortable at times, that I might sometimes make mistakes and like fuck up when I talk about. And all of that's difficult to do, and it's always easier to avoid all of that and not engage with it, but it just makes me want to do that even more because I think it's important. I know there are a lot of, it doesn't seem like there are a lot, but I follow a lot of like white progressives out there, and I really hope that I do not see a collective like backing off from anybody. This is not a time to back off. This is not a time to like hide and to try and appease and to try and change how you do things because it feels like it's not popular. I don't know that it ever was, but I don't know. To me, it just feels like it's more important now than ever.
I'm with you. We're in a space where I, day in and day out, am not challenged based on my beliefs because I can be perceived as the same as the party in question. They can just assume that's a white guy. He might be pretty conservative. I think that like it's on us to show and be an example and really, like you said, use our platform to advocate for those who may be discriminated against in those ways. And yeah, this is how it always feels when, it feels more dire now than ever, I would say, but this is how it feels when the first Trump administration came into effect. I remember feeling like I'm not worried for myself. I'm worried for other people. I'm worried for the people that I encounter in my life, some of my friends, family. The fact that there is just a segment of the country that is not even willing to engage with that and is not even willing to see that there is someone else that's being discriminated against is extremely frustrating. And I think it's, I'm finding it difficult at times to grapple with the fact that moral good isn't seeming to be a thing that people hold in high regard anymore. And I don't care what people say. It's like based on their actions and the fact that they voted for him. And that's the thing that like, yeah, I feel like I've been fluctuating between just like really sad and just really angry. And I don't necessarily know how to channel all of that yet, but I definitely have no plans of just kind of sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah. And so I was thinking about some of the people that we've covered on this podcast over the years. Even I think earlier this year we covered Stanislaw Lem, and he, was working against the Nazis by supplying munitions to these rebel groups. I was thinking about Mikel Ende, who was like literally drafted into the Nazi army and tore up his draft papers and instead joined a resistance group. I was thinking about like Ursula K. Le Guin and James Baldwin and people like that, obviously, who've long been advocates for, on the American side, for people and for freedom and social justice. And I was just thinking about all of them and like in how like I didn't think we were in a society where we might have to do stuff like that, where we might be the ones who are working against the powers that are actually in control in such a way. But it seems like that might be the case now. So if I'm going to celebrate these people, I need to be willing to follow in their footsteps, right? So, I hope things don't get that dire. I really do. I really hope that it's all been blown out of proportion and it ends up not being that bad, because that means less people are being harmed. But if it is as bad as I worry it could be, then that could put us in a position like that.
This has like always been that sort of fascist lean to things, is they want to try to silence by threat.
Yeah.
And I refuse to be silenced. So
yeah. So if we at some point in the next 4 years stop this podcast, it is not going to be because of political pressure. It'll be for some other reason, but that's not going to be why we're going to stop it. So anyway, I guess I don't really know where to leave it, other than I'm just, committed to going forward and continuing to do the things the way we've done them, if not being maybe even more in your face with our politics at times, and making sure that we're not shying away from these kind of topics, and advocating for diversity in art, which continues to be a problem, and I think is going to be even more under fire now, as we're going to see some, course corrections, is going to be called from Hollywood and other executives, at least in positions of power, who are going to try to appeal to what seems like a more racist country. So I'm worried about that, and I want to call it out when I see it. So I hope, because I do know the many creative people that make up both of our industries are majority good people who want to be inclusive and to want to put forward diverse art. I see it all the time, and I hope that it's not just empty words, and I hope that they'll continue to fight for it too, from the inside.
I also want to say that I don't think that the vote is indicative of the true leaning of the country. It just depresses me that it's ended up this way currently.
I do think that it says something about our information ecosystem, and I think a lot of people have been convinced that the alarms that were being sounded by people on the left were hysterics, were, false, that all the stuff that we are saying is going to happen isn't going to happen. And I hope they're right. But I'm really worried that we weren't, and that this is going to be an assault on democracy as we know it in this country going forward. And Project 2025 plays out, it's going to be really scary, to put it mildly. So, but yes, I agree. I'm not saying that. In fact, I do still want to believe that the majority of people care. I just think it's going to be about messaging. It's going to be about convincing people, and we'll do a little bit here and there as we can, as we talk about art, which, by the way, I think is the thing that probably radicalized me the most, was art throughout my life. Meeting people outside my experience, I would say equally, if not more, but definitely consuming art and thinking about it critically and thinking about the messages behind it is one of the things that radicalized me most. So, and
also just morality, you choose to live other experiences through friendships with others, and then also through these stories. And I think you start to suss out and really define what you think is right and wrong. And I think that often, because of those diverse stories, you can start to understand some of the imbalances.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's a vehicle for empathy, right? That's truly what art can be. Okay, so that's soapbox moment over. I think we're going to get into our core competency here and talk about Shutter Island. So take a moment, take a breath. We're going to move into talking about Dennis Lehane. This is an author that has been on our radar for a long time. He's got a lot of adaptations that have been made of his stuff. He's someone we've wanted to cover, and he won the final quarterly poll of the year. Just barely edging out, I think, 10 Things I Hate About You. And I wanted to tell people who maybe were disappointed in the way the poll went that all of those suggestions are going to be carried over into the new year, and they'll have chances to win polls in the future. But this is the one that won. I'm excited to finally get to it. I do think this is a movie we've both seen, but we had both not read the book. Is that true?
Yeah. So Scorsese's film, definitely, I saw it in theaters. I remember really enjoying it. I remember specifically, I connect this a lot with Inception, because both of those films came out at the same time in 2010, or relatively the same year. And I just to say here, there is a twist ending to this, so we will give some general thoughts before getting into any of the spoilers. But if that's something that's gonna keep that in mind as we go forward. But yeah, I remember liking this film a lot, and going into the book, I was curious, how much would have come from Scorsese, how much would have come from the original source. And I mean, just getting the chance to talk about Scorsese next week is going to be so much fun, because this is, if you can believe it, we've been doing this for like 6+ years now. Uh, First time we're going to cover Scorsese, who's just like a master. I swear it's true.
It doesn't feel right.
I know.
I guess it is. Wow.
It's going to be crazy to talk about, because he really is like one of those filmmakers, just like in the pantheon of greatest. And then he as time has gone on, has become like an advocate for new voices in film and stuff like that. Yeah. So he's just, it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about.
Yeah, a filmmaker I have a ton of respect for. But yeah, I had never read this book. So today we're going to focus on the book. We're going to save the movie. It's going to be a whole episode next week. But right now we're talking about the book. I had never read his stuff, but I'd always heard his name. He's an author who's come, highly recommended to me over the years. And I kind of expected to love the writing. And I'm glad to say I did. I thought this was really excellent prose, just on a line level. I found his writing really engaging. He has a real eye for description, for metaphor. Clearly someone who thinks a lot about the craft of writing. And that tracks with what I read about him in his bio.
Yeah, and I got a lot out of this book because of that. Going in, I was expecting it to kind of be what it is actually, is like a kind of a police procedural psychological thriller kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I was shocked at how much I was enjoying it, and I feel like we make this comparison probably too often. Something about maybe the style of story or something like that reminded me of Stephen King, and I almost feel like in some weird sort of like Bernstein Bears or whatever that thing is, what's that called? Mandela
effect. Yeah.
I thought, for some reason, Stephen King may have wrote this novel.
I can see why you might think that, but no.
But to give him credit, I really did get a lot out of the story. I found myself like getting sucked into it, even though I'd already seen the film, so I knew the ending. I found myself like going along the journey and buying into it. And I actually didn't remember all of the ways that it sort of weaves this tale.
Have you looked into the other things he has written? Because I'm going to reveal those, and I'm going to be curious, because I feel like you're going to know a bunch of them.
I'm sure I will. Yeah, I know that he wrote Mystic River.
That's one of them. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. So we'll get into that. There's more, but I found I was making a comparison to another author, but then I also feel like it's almost not fair to him to make this comparison. I was getting a little bit of Cormac McCarthy.
Oh, wow.
But
yeah, I can see it.
I don't think he approaches that voice.
It's a different
voice, but I
think he's playing in the same space.
There's something about it that was evoking Cormac McCarthy to me, which I think is the highest of praises I can be giving somebody, honestly, because I have a lot of respect for Cormac McCarthy.
I'm sure that he would probably appreciate that.
Yeah. I'm not saying that his prose is on that level. I would not make that claim, because I think Cormac McCarthy was such a singular voice that is honestly so unique that it's really hard to say anyone is like him. But yeah, a little bit. I think if you're a Cormac McCarthy fan, this writing might appeal to you. I do think this book is a little more pulpy and thrilling, and I guess the focus to me feels like it's more on the dynamics of the story. Not that it doesn't have a thematic resonance, because it does. It certainly is talking about delusion and talking about psychosis and lying to oneself and coming to grips with trauma. And all those are big, heavy subjects, but I don't know that it is approaching it from the point of view of trying to say something truly profound about them, as much as it is using them as a vehicle to tell an interesting story. And if it sounds like I'm being kind of critical there, it's because I am, and that's one of my criticisms of the book, I would say, overall. When we'll get into more reasons as to why, because I did really enjoy reading this book, and like I said, on a line-to-line level, I think he's a really excellent writer. But I didn't find it to be like a transcendent read where I'm like going to say this is one of my favorite books or anything. Part of that, I will admit, is that I knew a big twist that comes towards the end of this book. But I also like to think that freed me up a little bit to focus on that element of it more and not be caught up as much in the plot. But because of that, I found the book was a little wanting, and I found that ultimately its messages weren't something that I was finding were like challenging me in some way or bringing some sort of like truth to me that I had never thought of before, like a lot of the like, you know, best literature out there can do.
I didn't walk away feeling like it was one of my favorite stories either. But I love this exercise of like having already had the reveal. And like you said, part of me does wish I had just read it straight up. And if that was my first experience with it, I can see someone reading this on its own, getting all the reveals for the first time, and with the power of the story and saying like, oh my God, I absolutely love this book. So that's where I'll leave that. But for me, based on my prior experience with this story, really fun that it's like kind of a period piece.
Yes.
It's got this like, I like that
Gothic
it's like honing
feel.
in. Yeah, it's honing in on like the fact that it's isolating on this island. You don't have the communication devices that we have nowadays, so they're just like, you know, so and so sailed away and we haven't heard from them in a couple of weeks, that kind of thing. I mean, just to give you a little bit of the story is like it's an asylum island basically, and someone has escaped. And so it's kind of the investigation and trying to figure out.
Kind of like Alcatraz, but I heard it's actually based off of a different island. But to me, it reminded me a little bit of Alcatraz because it's set in like the 50s.
Having been over to Alcatraz and like seeing that whole setup, like that's where I go immediately when I hear asylum on an island for sure.
Yeah, I forget if it said it was in Washington, but it felt like it was Pacific Northwest at one point when they were talking about it. But I'm actually unclear on where exactly it was because then they were talking about Boston. So then I was like, maybe I am on the East Coast. But then at one point they were talking about, I think Chuck was from Oregon. And so I was maybe they didn't say exactly where it was. Unclear.
The characters have like both been through war and they're kind of relating a lot of things, specifically World War II.
World War II, yeah,
that.
a lot of like PTSD obviously, and these characters have gone through a lot. We'll get into that, and I want to talk about Dennis Lehane and his you know backstory and stuff. But I guess what I would kind of leave my kind of general reaction to the book is that I liked it. Borderline loved it, but didn't quite fall head over heels in love with it. But it's good enough to where I am excited to read more of his work and feel like there may be books in his catalog that I would absolutely love. It fully feels like he's capable of that, and maybe just this isn't the one for me, but like I'd love to read Mystic River. I love that movie. And I feel like that might have something really interesting to say. There are other books we'll get into that have been adapted, so we'll have other opportunities potentially that we could return to him. Really interesting writer.
That's great. Yeah, I feel the same way. I would like to read more from this author.
So let's talk about Dennis Lehane for a bit. He was born in 1965, an American author who has published more than a dozen novels. The first several were a series of mysteries featuring recurring characters. 4 of his novels have been adapted into films. Including Clint Eastwood's Mystic River, Martin Scorsese's Shutter Island, which we're covering today, Gone Baby Gone in 2007, and Live by Night in 2016, which were both directed by Ben Affleck.
Interesting.
His short story Animal Rescue was adapted into the film The Drop, which was noted as being James Gandolfini's final film he was in. And he actually wrote that screenplay himself. So he adapted it. No, sorry. Lehane adapted his own short story.
Oh, that's cool.
One. So I've seen Gone Baby Gone, obviously Mystic River and this one, but I haven't seen any of those other ones. So those would all be new to me if we covered, Live by Night or The Drop.
I haven't seen either of those either. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. He's a graduate of Boston College High School and went to Eckerd College, and then he went to the graduate program for creative writing at Florida International University in Miami. So he got his grad degree from Miami, FIU, which we both know from Florida. So
yeah, I know quite a few people who went there.
I thought this was cool. I did not know this until looking into it here. So he also has like this film side of his career. He joined the writing staff for The Wire in the 3rd season.
Oh shit, that's awesome.
Yeah, and
that's
he
cool.
wrote the teleplay for the episode Dead Soldiers, and he made a cameo appearance in the episode Middle Ground. Which he didn't write. But then he was also a writer for the 4th season, where he wrote the episode Refugees. He was credited in the final season for writing the episode Clarifications. So also I think he was just in the writer's room for The Wire, basically from the 3rd season on.
I love The Wire. I haven't seen it since it ended, and I need to do a rewatch.
Yeah.
But in general, it's one of the greatest shows ever.
One of the
in my
greatest
opinion.
shows ever.
And
Yeah, absolutely. Love
and
that show.
like I don't know specifically those episodes. I wish I could recall and be like, oh, that's such a good
Yeah.
episode or whatever.
I don't
but
either.
that's
I
really
just wanted to
cool.
put him out there in case there are massive Wire fans listening. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Really cool to hear that. He's also been involved in some other stuff that I really enjoyed. He joined the writing staff for Boardwalk Empire as a writer and creative consultant. Specifically helped outline the 4th season of the show, and he wrote at least one episode. So I liked Boardwalk Empire a lot. It's a little uneven at times, but cool to hear that he was a part of that.
I fell off. There was a certain character death that I fell off, and I'm sure you know what I'm
I know,
talking about.
yeah.
I fell off right around there. But I liked what I saw.
So he was also a episode writer for the show The Outsider, which we covered on this podcast. He wrote episodes 7 and episode 9. So In the Pines, and Tigers and Bears.
I'll admit that I remember with that show that we preferred the earlier episodes.
I do remember that as well. But anyway, I just thought it was cool that his hands are like in a lot of these things that I knew about. I didn't even realize, how involved he was. And he's still working. He's still writing for TV, writing his own stuff. He's written a bunch of books. Sounds like there's another show in the works that he's a part of. So, excited to return to him in the future for sure. Definitely let us know what other Dennis Lehane novels you think we should read and cover adaptations for. But yeah, I mean, he's had this good career. As for Shutter Island, what he said about it is that he wanted to write a novel that would be an homage to Gothic settings, B movies, and pulp. He described the novel as a hybrid of the works of the Bronte sisters and the film The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. His intent was...
I think that's a little bit of what I was picking up, for sure.
Yeah. His intent was to write the main characters in a position where they would lack 20th century resources such as radio communication, and he also structured the book to be a, quote, more taut book than his previous novel, Mystic River. So, interesting to note here. He was inspired by the hospital and the grounds on Long Island in Boston Harbor for the model of the hospital and the island. He visited it in the blizzard of 1978 as a child with his uncle and family. So it was something he visited as a kid. But yeah, that's what I could find about him mostly. If you're ready, I think we can move into the plot. And at this point, I would say we're going to start engaging with some spoiler topics, even if we won't be getting into the big spoiler until the end. We may touch on it a little bit here or there. So, in 1954, widower U.S. Marshal Edward Teddy Daniels and his new partner Chuck All go on a ferry boat to Shutter Island, the home of Ashcliffe Hospital for the Criminally Insane, to investigate the disappearance of a patient, Rachel Solando, who is incarcerated for drowning her 3 children. Despite being kept in a cell under constant supervision, she has escaped the hospital and the desolate island. In Rachel's room, Teddy and Chuck discover a code that Teddy breaks. He believes the code points towards a 67th patient, when the records show only 66. Teddy also wants to avenge the death of his wife Dolores, who was murdered 2 years prior by a man named Andrew Lettuce, whom he believes is an inmate at Ashcliffe Hospital. In World War II, Teddy helped liberate Dachau. And let's stop there, because I'm realizing the next part really kind of gets into a big shift in the plot. So I think this is the setup of the plot. It's them arriving at the island. To me, I actually was really enjoying the writing here. I think this is the story at its most gothic. And I'm currently working on a piece that I would say is the most gothic thing I've ever written. So I was really enjoying just the language. I was like, "Oh, this is actually the kind of thing I want to be reading right now," and kind of immersing myself in this kind of language, and the way that he chose to describe things. I thought it was really evocative, just beautifully written, and I felt like I was transported to Shutter Island in a way that the best authors can do.
The description of Gothic makes sense to me when I think of it as a theme.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because it's not touching on some of the hallmarks. So I'm just curious, if you had any information on what would you say are specific Gothic?
Yeah. So I feel like to me it's more the vibes. It's it's dark and dreary. It's stormy. It's harsh environments. It's cold. It's what they call them Byronic figures. These grim dudes showing up on this ferry. You've got grim business to attend to, and they're in a place that's gone mad, and like the way a lot of the buildings are described, it's like they're holding on for dear life as the elements try and like, you know, tear them into the sea. It just, all of that to me feels kind of gothic, in the way that I conceive of it, at least. And so when I saw that in the description, I felt like it was kind of confirmed there. But I don't know, maybe gothic means different things to different people. But to me, that those vibes all fit.
When I hear that, I'm like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. But I love the way that you like articulating it like that.
Yeah,
makes all the sense in the world to me now. And I'm sure our listeners got some good information out of that as well. The way that merges with kind of a police procedural, almost film noir kind of vibe is what I would like about this story.
I bet Scorsese is going to see it that way too.
Yeah, I have a sneaking suspicion that he's going to play on those elements in the film, and specifically the way that this is playing with like what today we have certain I think guidelines in how you would run like a mental health facility, and then but here obviously the lobotomies, the kind of things that they were talking about.
It's touching on
they would experiment with. And
what was it? We did One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and this is like
I got a little
similar
bit of that too.
time frame, right?
Yep, got a bit of
and
that
like,
as well.
Things were really dark, in this period and in these kind of places. So, the things that go on provide this perfect backdrop. And it feels like he is this hero who's arriving, right? Like he's a veteran, he's a badass. He sees through the bullshit. He's an outsider who's come onto this island, and there's like some sort of secret going on. He suspects that maybe they're, experimenting on people. Something illicit's going on. Maybe it has ties to like the Nazis. And there's all these kind of cool conspiratorial thinking, and it's a fun feint in the direction of like, this is what this story is, and it ends up being, there's a lot of red herrings going on. But it is fun to engage with that material, and I definitely bought into it. I do think this is one of those stories where some people will read it and get very frustrated with feeling like they were manipulated and misled in a sort of dishonest way. And I would say that is true of the movie as well. And that's going to be highly subjective. It's something that I also think has been done a lot more in the years since 2003 when he wrote this book. He would have written it, after Fight Club, after like some of that, I don't know when A Beautiful Mind came out. That's kind of another famous example. As we start dancing around some of the spoilers here.
Yeah, hold on, guys. No one dig into the fact that we're talking about twist endings.
Again, we've given the warnings, right? That's all like so ingrained now. I feel like enough big stories did it to where we are a little more resistant to that these days than we maybe were in the early 2000s.
We were in like peak Shyamalan era, like just twists were like, it felt so fresh, it felt so exciting, and I think that this I would say that like this was getting into the end of some of that, like around when the film came out, like 2010-ish. Like it does feel like it was like that was the time period to do it. I think pulling it off now, it feels even more like a rug pull. But I think if you just go in with expectations of a Scorsese film or something like that, you can kind of not going in and saying like this is definitely going to be like an investigation and that's all there is to it. I think that more people will walk away liking it than not, is my point, I guess. And the story has a lot of the same merits as the film, the original story here. Yeah. The one thing I wanted to loop back with the Gothic thing, that I think when I hear Gothic, I think of like Gothic architecture. I think of like, creepy houses, possible like long shadows, and is what's in the shadows in the background, that kind of thing. And it's so cool to see like this is like, I don't know if this, maybe I'm incorrect in saying this, it's like almost like a neo-Gothic thing where it's like it's evolved beyond that. It's not like a haunted house and like that sort of thing. It's moving into, I don't think it's
so there's a Gothic era
that
was famous for its Gothic architecture. And then I think there was a Gothic art movement, and then there's like New Gothic probably. I'm not like an expert on this, but like I see what you're saying. This is definitely like more in the modern sense, but
to me it's like in the way that like Cormac McCarthy did like No Country for Old Men is like a neo-Western.
Neo-Western, yeah.
This feels like a neo-Gothic story in a sense.
And I like that.
It's moving beyond what I would perceive typically as like just an up and down gothic story. And that's really, it is just like a genre blender, obviously, here.
Yeah, no, I like that. And actually that makes me think that, like, because a lot of the themes of the book, I think are laid out in like the idea of like a person needing to confront their own truth and their own illness, and not medicate away from it. And that as a concept seems to be at the heart of this, and the sort of ramifications of that does feel like it's in keeping with something about the self and conflict with oneself that is probably at the heart of a lot of Gothic fiction. And instead you're taking it and putting it in like a mental health, more modernist lens, in a way. So we get a lot of this codebreaker stuff here early, where he's like, sussing out different codes, and we hear about a 67th patient. And if you know the reveals, a lot of this starts falling into place, and you say, okay, I can see the signs here. But I think if you're just reading the book, for the first time and you haven't had any other experience, there's not much here to really sort of tip your hand into what's really going on, I guess. It's pretty disguised. There's one important detail when he first meets Chuck, where he talks about his hands. His hands they seem like they belong to a different person. They don't feel like the right kind of hands for him, which feels at first like it's just kind of an interesting detail, but we'll find out later is important.
Yeah. I like the way that the depiction of the people in the asylum, like we meet like the associate warden or something like that. He's kind of like the assistant. Then we meet the full-on warden. They are just like kind of. You can just immediately get from their tone, their vibe, how they're talking about the patients, all this kind of stuff. They're seeing them like almost like lesser than.
Yeah, the warden's the worst, man.
Yeah, and
he seems like almost cartoonishly villainous.
Yeah, and then you get the people the patients that are there, and of course, like these are people who some have schizophrenia or other illnesses that I couldn't define, obviously, but there are like the people here have been afflicted by some sort of illness.
Yeah. It does seem like there's one woman who like just like rightfully killed her husband for being terrible or something, is now just kind of locked away, and she seems, I don't know, I love the way he described her. Like it was like she had a clarity to her, and it was like brought on from being like an intelligent person in a world full of idiots or something. I can't remember exactly what it was said, but something like that. And she just seemed really cool. And he was playing a little bit with the idea of like people getting locked up in some of these facilities who maybe didn't need to be there or shouldn't be there.
And that's the fear, obviously. And like all of the fear in general is that they were being treated horribly. This is like, there's true stories of this stuff happening around this era. I
was doing research for the project I mentioned earlier. I was doing research into journalists at the turn of the century, and I really wish I had her name. I was one of those people who could just remember names off the top of my head, but I don't remember it. But there was this journalist who she was like one of the early women journalists, really respected, and awards and stuff for her work. But she voluntarily got admitted to an asylum and was there for like months undercover, essentially. And then I don't even know how she got out, but when she got out, she wrote an expose on the conditions and the treatment of the patients after having gone through it herself.
I would be terrified that they were gonna drug her, do all kinds of,
I know, right?
All the possible stuff that could happen.
Yeah.
Like
I was just reading that story and going, holy shit, like this is so wild. And like the fact that someone did that, like there's
very brave.
Some really fucking cool stories about early journalism, stuff like that. It was like one of the first times someone had done a story like that and like put themselves at risk like that. It's very cool. But let's move on to the next paragraph here, and we can get more into the plot of the story once things start moving. So after Hurricane Carol hits the island, Teddy and Chuck investigate Ward C, where Teddy believes government experiments with psychotropic drugs are being conducted. While separated from Chuck and Ward C, Teddy meets George Noyce. I don't know why his name's Noyce, which is funny to me.
Noyce! Noyce!
George Noyce, a patient who says everything is an elaborate game designed for him and that Chuck is not to be trusted. As Teddy and Chuck return to the main hospital area, they are separated. Teddy discovers a woman in a sea cave he tried to take refuge in, who says she is the real Rachel Solando. She tells him that she was actually a psychiatrist at Ashcliff, and after discovering an illegal experiments being run by them, she was incarcerated as a patient. She escaped and has been hiding in different places on the island. She tells him to take care with the food, medication, and cigarettes, which have been laced with psychotropic drugs. After returning to the hospital, Teddy cannot find Chuck and is told that he had no partner. He escapes and tries to rescue Chuck at the lighthouse, where he believes the experiments take place. At the top of the lighthouse, he finds only hospital administrator Dr. Colley seated at a desk. And we'll stop there because we're about to get into a big reveal. But I want to back up and focus on him wandering around the island, investigating with Chuck, talking to different people, all this stuff with Rachel Solando and the investigations with her and how this was all handled.
You start to get some of this craziness, right? Like with the storms hitting, they're like venturing out into the storm to continue their investigation. And they're like going through the graveyard at one point, and then like they get split up, and then he ends up. It's so funny because often our main character ends up in a scenario where he's split up from other people, meeting up with people, which becomes relevant, obviously. But this cave one, the sea cave one, is particularly interesting because who is that person?
Yeah, unclear. At least at the time. So this Rachel Solando who he's investigating. At first she's gone, and then all of a sudden she's back, and they have her and they have him talk to her. And this isn't the one in the sea cave. And when he talks to her, she appears to have like dyed hair. And afterwards he's talking with Chuck, and he's like, it seemed like what she was saying was rehearsed. It seemed like it wasn't authentic. Which I thought was kind of cool because it was showing his like background as a marshal and how he actually would be able to perceive stuff like that. He isn't understanding why it is this way because we haven't been revealed yet. But he's actually right that that's what's going on. She's sort of pretending to be somebody she's not. And then, he meets this other version of Rachel Solando in the sea cave. And she's warning him about everything going on at this place. And that's something that he's gotten warned out by a few people. And we've set up this sort of looming Chekhov's psychotropic drugs. And the idea that like you could induce somebody to have delusions, and you could induce somebody to have psychosis, and that's kind of where I feel like the book wants you to be. It wants you to be thinking, we're reading about a man who's being convinced that he has lost his mind, and he's going to be trapped by this asylum, and they're lying to him and they're manipulating him, and like look how they're like playing on his trauma, and like. He's the only one who like can see the truth, but like there are times where maybe that doesn't seem like there's something else going on, but like that's where I think it wants the reader to be.
Especially because you get the sense that he starts to feel trapped. He starts to feel trapped on the island, like he can't leave. There's like things keeping him there.
Yeah.
And then one of the first people who starts to mention like you got to watch out. Like what you get is like we mentioned, we have some people who have severe illnesses, and so some people are going to have, and I think even schizophrenia is talked about in the way that like you can have. Like delusions that are just completely not true, and you can manifest things and create things in terms of your mind.
Yeah,
and
I do
when that's happening.
This is a good point, I think, to cut in and say like
medical correctness. Here.
Yeah. It's not. Yeah. It's like
accuracy.
I think he can get away with some of it because he can say like this is kind of the thinking of the time, which it was, I think, to largely, but I don't know how accurately a lot of this stuff is being portrayed. And how potentially we talk about harm that can be done. Like I do feel like there may be some harmful stereotypes of people, in particular the idea of bipolar. I think gets treated like his wife has this bipolar condition, and if you don't know anything about it, you could be forgiven for thinking that people who are bipolar are like murderous or like psychotic. And dangerous, and like
same for a lot of these illnesses, schizophrenia as well. Like they're a manageable illness. Like these are things that people live with.
Yeah, like I know people who are bipolar, and especially with medication, just people. Like come on, but like again, it's kind of playing into that pulpy area where like I think we have thought about this a lot over the years, but like there's an unfortunate sort of history of mental illness being equated with villains and being equated with monsters and being equated with dangerous people. And That's what this book does, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Like, that just as like a forewarning for people. Like, that is going to be in the heart of this book. I don't think it's particularly terrible about it, but it's there.
Yeah, as far as this character is concerned, and this book would have you believe, this character, you're supposed to, early on, you're supposed to think, oh, these people, they're not seeing the world, the perspective correctly. They're not seeing the world correctly, and they're maybe imagining some things, maybe some conspiracies they've drummed up. And so that's what the main character is supposed to think when he first meets this guy who's like, what is he talking about? The drugs, like you got to watch out for what they do on the island. He's talking about some of the things that they do. I think he starts to mention the food and stuff.
Yeah.
And the different drugs they'll administer.
Yeah.
Then she reiterates it in the sea cave. She's like, you got to watch out for the cigarettes, the food, the everything that's they're going to try to control you.
And Noyce is the guy who he's been like beaten up, and it's unclear as to why. There was some sort of like prisoners were trying to escape during the hurricane, and so we think that maybe that's what happened. But he is the one who first starts planting the seeds about maybe Chuck can't be trusted, because he's like, how much do you actually know him? Has he been here the whole time? Like, certain things that put that into question. And then we start to like wonder if Chuck even exists, because it seems like he's dead at one point, but then the thing he thinks is a dead body is actually just some rocks.
Somebody tells him at one point at the hospital when he gets back there that he's like, where's my partner, or something like that. They're like, you don't have a partner.
Yeah.
So then that starts to further bring that into question.
Are we ready for the reveal now, so we can kind of sort of talk about it in full knowledge?
Yeah, well, so the doctor is sitting at the top of this lighthouse.
Yeah, Dr. Cowley.
And moving forward with that, if you want to read the rest of the plot.
So Cowley tells Teddy that he himself is in fact Andrew Latus, an anagram of Edward Daniels, and that he has been a patient at Shutter Island for 2 years for murdering his wife, Dolores Chenal, an anagram of Rachel Solando, after she murdered their 3 children. Teddy refuses to believe this, grabs what he thinks is a gun, and tries to shoot Dr. Cowley, but the weapon is a toy water pistol. Chuck then enters, revealing that he is actually Andrew's psychiatrist, Dr. Lester Sheehan. He is told that with his combat training, coupled with history of violence, makes him an extremely dangerous patient. After mounting pressure from the Board of Overseers, Dr. Cowley and Chuck/Sheehan were allowed to carry out this experimental treatment, which allowed him to live out his elaborate fantasies in the hope that it would allow him to face reality, with the alternative being for him to undergo a lobotomy. Teddy still refuses to accept the truth, despite the evidence presented, and is brought to a cell in Ward C. After being sedated, he dreams about the months leading up to the death of his family. Because of his stubbornness and alcoholism, he failed to realize the extent of Dolores's mental instability, despite the warnings of those around him, including his children. One day, he forgot to properly store away the laudanum meant to treat her before leaving for 2 weeks, returning to find Dolores having drowned their children while under the influence of the medication. When he wakes up to find Cowley and Sheehan beside him, he accepts the truth of having killed his wife for murdering their children. Dr. Sheehan later approaches Andrew again to ensure that he has not regressed back into his delusion. Andrew, despite appearing to be at peace, talks to Sheehan as if he is Chuck and insists that he needs to get off the island. The novel ends as Teddy is approached by 4 orderlies with a white bag destined for a lobotomy. So, big reveal. He is Andrew Latus. He is Rachel is also his wife, Dolores. These were all anagrams. There's a lot of code stuff that's been going on. He's the 67th patient. He's been sort of telling himself this all along. And we get the big sort of rug pulled out from under you reveal that movies like this and stories like this are famous for.
So if you're here for the actual investigation, and the sort of police procedural thing, it's gone. It's no longer a part of the story.
It's a little frustrating if you were in for that, I think.
But I do think it is a cool
But there
reveal.
were clues there, so it's like there was still evidence with the anagrams and stuff.
Yeah, and it's fun to build stories like it goes from being like this police procedural investigation to being like, oh, it's like there was a mystery element because they're trying to figure it out, but it's like a big reveal, sort of like a mystery reveal that you expect from that genre. We learn a ton about his backstory and his wife and why he's built up a lot of these things and why he's ended up here. Like you said, maybe problematic as far as bipolarism is concerned.
Yeah.
having bipolar disorder. Because I don't think that if somebody missed their treatment that they would kill their children, but in this story that happens, and that's like the trauma of that is just really heavy. And I remember in the movie, the first time I was like, holy shit, like that's insane. And then we get the reveal that he actually couldn't take it anymore and proceeds to kill her, which like the guilt and the what would come with that and the trauma all wrapped up in that.
And I thought they did a really good job of establishing their love. There was this like, I mean, I almost want to call it like a meet cute that we get of when he first met her, and I thought it was really effectively done. It made us care for her, it made us see why he loved her so much, and why he was like willing to sort of lie to himself. It is, I think, notable that the mental illness of his wife is like what destroys his life, and like, I don't know, like there's something kind of troubling about that to me. And like it's like it's like all of his trouble comes from this woman. I don't know where to.
The unfortunate thing is like it's like you can build the story. This is so seated in mental illness, so it like makes sense that she has a disorder. But it's like, what if she just, lost it and killed the kids for whatever reason? Like, what if that was always within her and she was like that kind of person? Then you don't have the weird situation of, oh, this is like damaging possibly to those types to people who have this disorder.
Well, there was also like a weird, like in the memory, she's like talking about how she wants to like dress them up and like they can be our dolls and stuff. And I was like, this doesn't feel consistent to me with someone who was in a depressive episode. This feels like some sort of psychosis. Again, it just doesn't feel like it's necessarily dealt with the same way. It's like he had heard about this happening, because it does happen on there are times where this has happened for different reasons. Postpartum and things like that. And like, I feel like he kind of conflated a lot of stuff and kind of whipped it together into this thing that would be the most damaging it could be, so that he would sort of justify Teddy shooting her and killing her, which had been foreshadowed because he kept talking about her like stomach leaking and all that stuff, and he shot her in the stomach. But to me, this isn't quite in line with what I wanted from this story that seems to be about like forcing you to reckon with the truth of yourself, because it's like his big guilt is over killing his wife, whom he loved, because of what she did. Whereas I feel like the story shows that he feels like he's pretty justified. I guess it wasn't self-defense in the moment, but she had done something horrific. I don't know if we really blame him, but I like that, I guess, that he loved her so much that it broke him to do this, and that seems to be what happened.
I think it's also that he blames himself for what she did too, because he feels some level of responsibility.
Yeah, that's true. We're touching on delusion in this book, and the way that people live with their delusions and wrap themselves in them and like refuse to see the truth. And at first we're approaching it from one side, and then it flips to the other. Because at first I feel like the whole idea is that if you are in a place where they're telling you are mad and that you are not perceiving reality, everything you say can be used as further evidence of you not being able to perceive reality and being mad. And so that's that worry that like your truth is actually being twisted and used as evidence against you. And at this turning point in the book, it flips, and what we see now is the supposed truth is actually a lie that the character has come to believe. And that lie is so deeply rooted that even when presented with evidence to the contrary, he's unwilling to believe it, right? And up until the very end, where he's forced to engage with it. But that brings me to what I think is a really interesting thing to talk about here at the end, and that is whether or not he truly regresses. Because on a surface reading, it seems that he has gone back to believing everything, and it's a really kind of pessimistic ending of like, even after this big reveal and this big sort of cathartic moment of revelation, it seems that Teddy has regressed and he is now right back to where he was. But I also think there's a lot of evidence that may not be completely true, with the way we're talking about how good he feels, how clear he feels, how happy he seems, how content and peaceful and at rest he seems at the end. as he's engaging with Chuck and calling him Chuck and talking about how they need to get off the island and like all this stuff. And so I think there's an ambiguity here introduced of like, maybe he is saying this in order to get himself lobotomized in sort of a suicidal act, although it's not killing him, but like he wants to remove this pain. Perhaps.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I think if it is there, I think that's what it is that he doesn't want to deal with it anymore. He wants to forget it. He
knows that if he pretends like he isn't better, that'll happen.
So that's one reading of it. And I think that it's cool that there is the ambiguity there. I think that because he's Chuck, because he becomes Chuck again and he's talking as if he's Chuck.
Well, he becomes Teddy, but talking to Chuck.
Yeah. So he's talking to him as if he's Chuck, seeming like he's fallen back into it. But like you said, we get all of these visions and he's understood like sort of what all the events were that led to this point. It does leave you to wonder. And I don't know that I necessarily, I think the more interesting read is that as dark as it is, that the character is just done and has lost all and doesn't want to live this, doesn't want to at least be there for this, what's going to be left of his life
anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's very dark either way.
Yeah.
Right. Either way, it's very, very dark because either it's inescapable and this moment of clarity he had was fleeting and he falls right back into the delusion, or he's choosing this because of, in a sort of a self-destructive way, which is also very dark. I will say he wrote this traumatic character who's conflicted and torn by the horrors of his past and making him a veteran who's killed all these people and, was there at Dachau and like all this stuff. Like, he's been through so many tragic, traumatic things that I buy that he could be completely broken by this. So I don't know if we like fully said it here, but the whole reveal is that they were sort of playing up his delusion. He had this delusion that he was a marshal, and they were like, we're going to play act this thing, and we're going to treat him as if it's true. And he's going to come, and he's going to be an investigation, and we're all going to act like we're a part of it. And there was like a nurse who played the role of Rachel Solando and like dyed her hair and said, certain lines, and like the orderlies talked to him in a certain way. And like a bunch of these people were in on it. It's a little, to me, stretching credibility that like this could be done in the way that it's done.
Or that they would actually think it would be an effective use of therapy or something like that.
Why would this be effective?
Even then, I don't think that they would have believed that.
And the whole theory was that it was like, we want to force him to confront it rather than, this is his last chance to confront it rather than, and like he assaults some people. Like he literally, like they said, like some orderlies got like rifle butted and stuff. So it's not like, it was without risk. People could have been killed. So someone should lose their job over this.
Yeah, they had to like convince the board that this was something that they were going to be allowed to do in the first place, I think too. But yeah, I think for the sake of the story and to take you along for the journey, I do think in like looking back at the pieces as we already knew the ending, we worked our way through it, seeing that they were building it in that way, and specifically that Lehane built it that way. I think it's pretty impressive. I think it's cool to see that like you can create an entire narrative that then is completely subverted at the end, and then still look back and all the pieces fall into place. Like I think that the mysteries tend to do that quite often, and I think it's very cool, and it does work for me as like I almost think of this as like an alternate world or something like that. It's like too over the top in a way. It stretches credibility, but within the context of this story, I like the journey that it takes you on, and like the some of the big shocking moments and the reveals are really effective.
Yeah,
cool.
I really enjoyed reading this book. I think it's effectively done. I like the idea of a detective investigating the mystery of his own mind, even though he doesn't realize that he's doing that. I think that's a really compelling idea. Unfortunately, I don't think it's super original at this point. But credit to Lehane for doing it when he did. I think it was at this time, at least it felt fresher than it does now. Yeah, I guess that's where I'm at with it. Like it's a cool story idea. I love psychological stuff like this. I feel a little bit manipulated, but I'm okay with it personally. Like I'm along for the ride.
This is a great example of us damning with faint praise. Like I just want to say, as much as all through this, I feel like we've been saying like, yeah, but this, but that, yeah, I like it, but this, like, I actually really like this book. I liked reading the story, and I'm looking forward to watching the movie. And like I said, I want to read more of Lehane's material.
Definitely.
So I think part of it does come from the fact that we already knew the ending, and we're picking at it a little bit. But ultimately, like, I think it was pretty good, and
Definitely.
you know,
This
not.
is one of the best things I've read this year. It's up there. I really enjoyed it. It's just not. It wasn't quite like it felt like it had the potential to be like, oh, this is going to be a favorite book of mine. Especially early on as I was reading it, and I was sort of reveling in the language. It just didn't quite get to that height, and so that's why I'm sort of pointing out why. But I'm fully open to Lehane becoming a favorite author of mine, and I would like to read more of his stuff. So again, let us know in the comments if there's anything else that you would like to hear us cover. And in fact, if you enjoyed this episode, please let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on. And if you're on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and again, leave us a comment. We'd like to engage with people in the comment section.
Yeah, and be sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok. We're all over the place. All of those at Ink to Film.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to make a note that I have personally shut down my account. It's still active, but it's now private, and I've set the Ink to Film account to private on Twitter. I'm not intending to use those outside of some updates. So if you do follow us on there, you'll see occasional updates. But I have been putting more emphasis on Blue Sky, where I've been getting a lot of new followers on there. So I'm going to push people towards Blue Sky. That's the one that I want to use now more, as Twitter has turned into a true hellscape at this point.
Well, Twitter doesn't exist anymore, so
Exactly.
Yeah. There you go.
There you go. If you'd like to support this podcast monetarily, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/inktofilm. That's how this project was chosen. Once again, thank you to the patrons for choosing it. I'm excited to get into the movie next week and sort of finish it out. But if you wanted to be there to vote on future projects, that's where you're going to want to go. Also, we have bonus episodes that release every month, including our most recent one, which was on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Not the book, the movie. Another movie adaptation of it that has that title. So if you'd like to hear our take on that, you're going to want to check out patreon.com/inktofilm.
And thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, that's going to be it for this week. Thank you all for listening. Hopefully, we can provide some distraction for people in this time, whereas like I know that I have been looking for that. I think it's going to be a scary time, especially starting in the new year. So I think for the next couple months, we need to sort of fortify, take care of ourselves, and start making plans. And yeah, I'm going to be doing things that I'm not going to talk about on here in my personal life to help out people and to make sure that I'm trying to make a difference. But as far as the podcast goes, just want to continue to be some, prominent white dudes who are otherwise Republican presenting, who are definitely not that.
I actually want to say I take offense to that. I actually really hope that I don't. Republican
right. I think
present.
the long hair kind of says no, right? Like there's certain things that probably.
Well, I just cut my hair, so we'll need to.
I thought you just had it in a ponytail. I didn't even realize.
Not today.
Whoa.
No.
Well, if you're on YouTube, you can appreciate James' short hair. How about that? Woo. I can't believe I literally thought you had it in a ponytail. There it is.
Yeah. Anyway, I will do my best to not present that way, even with significantly shorter hair. I cut 10 inches off my hair and I'm donating it. So there's that.
Nice. Well, and I feel like our sign-off words are maybe even more important now. And that's until next time.
Keep adapting.